Texas Hill Country, spring of 1873. The girl came stumbling out of the cedar brake at a dead run, her skirts torn, face streaked with dirt and panic, then collapsed right there in the middle of the pasture. Not 10 yards from where Oren Marlow was checking the fence line. He dropped the pliers in his hand and sprinted across the grass. "Miss," he called, kneeling beside the crumpled figure. "Can you hear me?" She was breathing fast, too fast. Her hands were scraped raw, her boots half fallen off. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. Oren saw blood on her sleeve and a swollen bruise blooming on her cheekbone. "I need, please," she gasped. "You are safe now," he said, steady and clear. "You are on my land. No one's going to hurt you." Her eyes fluttered open. They were green, sharp even through the haze of fear. "Do not let them take me back." Oren did not know who they were, but he knew what terror looked like. He saw it in her eyes, raw and real. He slid an arm under her shoulders. "You are not going anywhere but inside where it is warm," he said. "Come on." She winced but did not argue. The ranch house was just over the ridge. Oren carried her the whole way. Her name was Marabeth Fletcher. She told him that 2 days later, when the fever broke and she could sit up without swaying. She was 22 and from Blanco, a day's ride south. Her voice shook when she spoke, and she kept looking toward the door like someone might burst through it. He had not asked questions, not yet. She had collapsed half-starved and half-dead on his land. That was enough. But now, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands curled around a mug of broth, her voice steadied. "My uncle arranged a marriage. I said no. He said I did not have a choice." Oren leaned back in his chair. "So you ran." "I waited until the house went quiet. Slipped out before dawn. He had a man watching the door, but I used the cellar window." Her hands trembled. Oren reached across the table and covered one with his own. She flinched, then let him. "I walked until my feet bled. Hid in a barn the first night. Next day I followed the river until I saw your fence." Her eyes lifted to his. "I thought I was going to die." "You almost did," Oren said. "You were burning up with fever when I found you." Marabeth blinked hard, then looked down. "I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not marry that man." Oren nodded. "You do not have to explain." "I do, though," she said. "You took me in. Fed me. You did not have to." "I do not leave people in the dirt," Oren said. "Not out here." He did not say more than that. She did not need a man's pity, she needed safety. And maybe something steadier. Oren had lived alone since his father passed, keeping the ranch together with calloused hands and long hours. He never thought much about what came next. But seeing Marabeth asleep in his spare room, her breathing finally even, something had shifted. He could not go back to the quiet after this. He did not want to. By the end of the week, Marabeth was strong enough to help around the house. She moved carefully, but her eyes were brighter. She cleaned the porch without being asked, mended a torn curtain. She even started cooking, and Oren discovered she made the best sourdough biscuits he had ever tasted. One morning, as she hung laundry near the coop, Oren came up beside her. "You could stay," he said. She looked at him, wary. "I mean it," he said. "You would be safe here. I would not ask anything of you." She folded a towel with shaking hands. "Folks would talk. Let them. I do not want to be kept," she whispered. Oren stepped closer. "I do not want to keep you. I want to marry you." Marabeth froze. He watched her carefully. "Not because of what happened. Not out of pity. You are strong and kind, and brave as hell, and I have not stopped thinking about you since the day I carried you inside." She blinked fast, eyes shining. "You hardly know me. I know enough. I know I do not want to see you go." Marabeth looked down at the sheet in her hands. Then she looked back at him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No one has ever offered me a choice." "Well," Oren said, voice low, "this one is yours." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. They were married under the oak tree behind the house 3 days later. The preacher rode out from town, and Oren's neighbor brought over a fresh pie. Marabeth wore a simple blue dress and wildflowers in her hair. Oren had never seen anything more beautiful. After the vows, she leaned close and whispered, "I never thought anyone would want me for me." Oren brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I do. I always will." That night, after the sun sank low, they sat on the porch side by side, hands clasped, the stars stretching wide above them. The land was quiet. Safe. The shadows that chased her had fallen away. And for the first time in her life, Marabeth Fletcher Marlow felt like she belonged. The chickens had taken to Marabeth faster than Oren expected. She moved among them with a quiet steadiness, scattering feed with practiced rhythm, never flinching when one flapped a little close. He watched from the gate, arms folded, the early sun warming the back of his neck. She noticed him after a moment and straightened, brushing her palms along her apron. "There's a hen brooding in the far box," she said. "I left her be. She always goes broody in spring," Oren said. "Come June, you'll step outside and find a trail of chicks underfoot." Marabeth smiled, small but real. "I've never stayed in one place long enough to see that happen." Oren stepped closer, boots soft in the dust. "You will now." She looked at him, and something settled in her shoulders. They walked back to the house together, the air crisp and scented faintly with dew and mesquite. On the porch, Marabeth paused, gaze drifting toward the low ridge beyond the barn. "I'd like to ride out today," she said. "Farther than we've gone." He hesitated. "You sure?" "I need to see the edges," she said. "Know what's mine now." He nodded and saddled the horses while she packed a small satchel with bread and dried peaches. By the time they rode out, the sky had turned clear and high, the kind that made the land feel endless. They followed a narrow trail up through limestone outcroppings and stands of scrub oak. When they crested the ridge, the hills opened wide before them, rolling green and gold, dotted with cattle, shimmering in the light. Marabeth pulled her horse to a stop and looked out. "It's beautiful." He dismounted and walked beside her, reins looped lightly over his hand. "Been in the family since before the war. Feels older than that," she said. "Like it's been waiting." "For what?" She looked down at him, eyes steady beneath the brim of her hat. "For someone to see it proper." They sat in the grass and ate in silence. When Oren leaned back on his elbows, he noticed her studying his hands. "Did you ever want something different?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not once." "No towns? No rail lines? No more fixing fence in the rain?" "This land made me," he said. "It's in my blood." She nodded slowly. "My mother used to say the same." Oren waited. "She was Comanche," Marabeth said. "My father met her near San Saba. She died when I was little." He hadn't known. She hadn't said. "I wasn't raised among her people," she went on. "My uncle didn't speak of her. But I remember her voice. She sang while she cooked. Soft like honey over stone." Oren reached out, not touching her, just letting his hand fall close. "You carry her still." Marabeth closed her eyes, and the wind stirred the grass around them. "I want to learn more. About her. About me." He nodded. "We'll find a way." She opened her eyes again, and this time, when her fingers found his, she didn't let go. They rode back as the sun lowered behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture. Inside the house, she lit the lamp while he stoked the stove. The silence between them had changed comfortable now, like something built brick by brick. Later, as they sat reading by the hearth, Marabeth looked up from her book. "I want to plant a garden," she said. "Something that'll last." Oren set his aside. "We'll start in the morning. There's good soil south of the coop." She nodded, then leaned her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the crickets hummed outside. The world beyond the hills still held its shadows. But inside that house, with her hand in his and the scent of mesquite drifting through the open window, there was only peace and the quiet promise of everything they were building, one day at a time. They started the garden at first light, the soil still damp from the night's dew. Oren turned the earth with a short-handled hoe while Marabeth laid out seeds in careful rows: beans, squash, onions, and a handful of blue corn kernels given to her by the neighbor woman who'd brought pie to their wedding. She said they came from her grandmother's field, and Marabeth tucked them into the soil like they were meant to grow there. By the time the sun cleared the oak trees, her cheeks were streaked with dust and the back of her neck glistened with sweat. She wiped her hands on her skirt and sat on a flat stone near the fence, watching the wind ruffle the leaves of the young peach trees. Oren crouched beside her, his shirt damp where it clung to his shoulders. "You've got a good hand for it. I used to help in the boarding house garden," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Back before my uncle took me in. The woman who ran it said plants understand the quiet ones." "You're not quiet," he said. "I used to be." She stood and walked toward the shed where she began sorting through the shelves of tools. Oren followed, watching her sift through a box of nails and twine. "Do you want to build something?" he asked. "I was thinking," she said, holding up a cracked wooden frame. "We could make a drying rack. For herbs, maybe. I've seen wild mint down by the creek." He took the frame from her and tested its joints. "We've got extra slats in the barn. I'll cut them to size this afternoon. I can help. You can measure. But I'm not letting you work the saw yet." His eyes flicked to the fading bruise on her forearm. "Not till your arm's stronger." She didn't argue, just nodded and turned back to the shelf, pulling out a spool of coarse thread. That evening, while the crickets sang low and steady behind the barn, Marabeth sat on the porch with a bundle of mint in her lap. She was tying them into small bunches, her fingers moving with even grace. Oren sat beside her, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rasp steady and slow. "I've been thinking about winter," she said without looking up. "What we'll need put up, what we can trade for." He paused, stone hovering above the blade. "You already planning 6 months ahead?" "It's how I kept myself steady," she said, "thinking of what comes next. You don't have to brace against it anymore." "I know," she said, "but I still want to be ready." He set the knife aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What else do you want to grow out there?" She looked over at him, her face soft in the lantern light. "Tomatoes. Maybe some yarrow if I can find seed. And cotton." "Not much, just a patch." "Cotton? My mother spun her own thread. I remember the spindle. I'd like to try it if I can learn." He nodded. "We'll make room." They sat quiet again, the day folding into dusk. Marabeth reached for the last sprig of mint, and as she tied the string around it, her voice dropped low. "There's a scar on my back," she said. "It's from a riding crop. He used it the night I said no." Oren didn't move. He let her speak. "I don't want you to find it by accident," she said. "If we ever—" Her voice trailed off. The lantern hissed faintly. He reached for her hand, not gentle, not hesitant, just steady. "You're not a secret, Marabeth. Not to me." She looked down at their joined hands. "I want closeness. I think I do. But sometimes it still feels like a locked door." "We'll wait till it opens," he said. "And if it never does, I'll still be here." Her eyes filled but didn't spill. She leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder, and they sat that way until the lantern guttered and the stars came out full. Later, as they lay in bed still dressed, covers pulled over them, Marabeth traced the outline of Oren's hand in the dark. "I used to dream of escape," she whispered, "but I never dared dream of being chosen." "You weren't chosen," he said. "You were met. Right where you were." She turned toward him and for the first time let herself rest against the shelter of his body. Not out of fear, not to hide, but because she wanted to. The wind rose gently against the shutters and inside the hush of belonging held. The first full rain came in late May. Not a storm, but a steady, soaking fall that lasted through the night and well into the next day. It turned the yard to mud and filled the rain barrels to overflowing. The garden drank deep, and by morning, tiny green shoots had begun to break the surface of the turned soil. Marabeth stood barefoot at the threshold, skirts drawn up in one hand, watching water drip from the porch eaves. Oren was finishing his breakfast when he saw her there, silent and still. "You need something?" he asked, setting his cup aside. She didn't answer right away. Then, without turning, she said, "There's a creek beyond the east pasture. I'd like to see it when the water runs high." Oren pulled on his boots. You want to go now? She nodded. There's a rhythm to water after rain. I used to listen for it as a child. It's the only thing that ever quieted my mind. He didn't press her. They saddled the horses and rode out slow, the ground soft beneath the hooves, the scent of wet cedar thick in the air. The creek was swollen, not wild but fast, threading between banks lined with willow and river cane. Marabeth dismounted and knelt beside the water's edge, reaching out to trail her fingers through the current. Oren stayed back, giving her room. She closed her eyes, breathing deep, and when she finally stood, her expression was different, unwound, like something inside had found its place. I've been thinking about my mother's people, she said, still watching the water. I don't know where to begin, but I want to. Oren stepped beside her, careful not to spook the stillness she held. You think there's someone who might still know her name? I remember a word she used once, Numunu. It took me years to understand what it meant. Her voice caught. She was trying to tell me who I was. Oren looked out over the creek. We can ride north when the season turns. There's families still holding land outside Fort Belknap. Someone might know. She turned to him. Would you come with me? I wouldn't let you ride that far alone. She touched his sleeve. I didn't mean for protection. He met her eyes. I know what you meant. As they rode back, the clouds thinned and the sun broke through in pale strips. Marabeth kept glancing at the sky like she expected it to speak. When they reached the house, she headed for the barn without a word. Oren followed, curious. Inside, she was gathering scraps from the tool bench, bits of wood, a length of wire, an empty tobacco tin. She laid them out on the work table, frowning at the pieces. You making something? He asked. I used to build little things. Back before I was told not to. She picked up the tin. Used to make wind chimes from these. What for? They helped me sleep. Oren nodded and left her to it. When he returned that evening, she had strung together a crooked little frame with wire and tin slats hung from a bent nail above the barn door. When the breeze caught it, it gave off a soft, irregular clatter, not pretty, but honest. He didn't say anything. Just stood beside her in the dusk, listening. That night, Marabeth didn't wait for sleep to drift closer. She reached for Oren as he lay beside her, not out of fear or need, but something quieter, wanting, not rushed. He watched her carefully, not moving until she did. Her touch was uncertain at first, but she didn't pull away. When her forehead came to rest against his chest, he let his arm settle around her, the weight of it neither heavy nor light, just enough to be felt. I'm not afraid of you, she said, voice almost too soft to hear. I thought I would be. The first time I let someone touch me again. Oren pressed his lips to her hair. It'll always be your pace. She didn't answer. He felt the slow rise and fall of her breath as the wind outside shifted, rattling the tin slats against the barn in a rhythm all their own. In the morning, she was already up, kneeling in the garden, fingers brushing the tiny sprouts like they were old friends. When he stepped outside, she turned and smiled, not wide, not sudden, but steady and sure. Oren crossed the yard to her, crouched beside the row of corn. Looks like something's coming up. It is, she said. And it's going to hold. The new fence around the south pasture took 3 days to finish. Marabeth measured and marked each post while Oren handled the digging and setting. By the second afternoon, her cheeks were sun-flushed and her back sore, but she never asked to stop. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled and hands wrapped in cloth to keep out splinters, her focus steady. When the final crossbeam was nailed into place, she stepped back and looked down the line of cedar rails stretching toward the tree line. Straight as a plum string, she said. Oren wiped the sweat off his brow with the back of his arm. You've got an eye for alignment. I had to learn to see things others missed, she said, then added, never thought it'd come in handy for fencing. They didn't linger. The sky was dimming and the horses needed water. As they walked back toward the house, Oren glanced at the small satchel tied to her saddle. You packed something? She nodded. Letters. From my father's chest. I found them under the floorboard in the attic. He stopped. You didn't say. I wanted to read them first. See if there was anything worth keeping. Oren didn't press. They walked the rest of the way without speaking. That night, while he tended the oil lamp in the parlor, she sat at the table with a folded sheet of paper in her hands. She didn't read from it. Just stared, eyes narrowed like she was weighing something. He never wrote about her by name, she said. But he mentioned a village east of the Brazos. Said it was a place of peace. A place where he learned to listen. Oren leaned in the doorway. You think she came from there? I think it's where they met. She folded the paper slowly. I want to go. Not today, not tomorrow. But I want to see it. He nodded. We'll ride when the ground's dry and the garden's set. She ran her fingers along the edge of the table. Do you ever wonder what your father would have thought of this life we're making? Oren crossed the room and pulled out the chair across from her. He'd have said you've got more grit than any man who ever set foot in this house. Marabeth smiled faintly. He'd have hated my cooking. He'd have eaten every bite and asked for seconds. She laughed, then brief and low, and it caught them both off guard. She looked at him and something in her face shifted. I've never had a home I helped build, she said. Not until now. He reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. You built this one with both hands. And it's yours, same as mine. The wind picked up outside, rattling the door latch. She stood and walked to the window, peering out into the dark. There's a doe that comes at dusk, she said. She drinks from the trough, then disappears toward the ravine. You name her yet? No, she said. Not everything needs a name. She turned then, and he saw something different in her eyes and ease. Not loud or sudden, but settled. She crossed the room and reached up to touch his face, her fingers warm from the lamp's heat. I want to stay here, she said. Not just for a season. I want to grow old with you in this house. I want to watch the roof weather and the trees thicken and the porch boards wear smooth. Oren didn't answer right away. He held her face in both hands and kissed her slowly, like the answer was already known between them. They married again that summer, not with vows, but with the small things, the weaving of new chairs from rawhide and oak, the painting of the west wall, the planting of a second row of peach saplings. Their days settled into rhythm, herbal bundles drying in the barn rafters, chickens clucking among the fig bushes, the smell of bread rising each Friday. When autumn came, they rode east. The journey took 4 days, with nights spent camped beneath cottonwoods and mornings warmed by river mist. They found the village smaller than she imagined, but still standing. A few elders remained, and one remembered a woman named Sana, who sang to the children and left with a quiet man after the grass fires. Marabeth didn't cry. She didn't speak for a long while. But that night, sitting by the fire with Oren's arm around her, she whispered, I remember her humming. That was her name. Sana. They returned home with a small clay jar gifted by one of the women. It sat on the mantel from then on, beside a folded braid of sweetgrass and a carved spindle Oren had shaped for her hands. Years passed. The garden grew wide and full, and the house weathered as she'd hoped. They added a second room when the winters got colder, and Oren built her a loom from cedar beams. She spun thread from the cotton she'd planted herself, and when she wove, he liked to sit nearby, listening to the soft rhythm of her shuttle moving back and forth. They never had children, though they tried. But the land was full of life, and their days never felt lacking. Stray calves were brought in and raised on sweet milk. A neighbor's orphan niece stayed one summer and never left. They taught her to ride and plant and read by firelight. On their 20th year, Oren carved a bench from the oak that had shaded their wedding. They placed it near the edge of the ridge where the land stretched wide and open. In the evenings, they sat there hand in hand, watching the wind bend the grass and the light fall slow across the fields. Marabeth's hair silvered and Oren's hands stiffened, but they never stopped working. Never stopped choosing each other. Not once. And when strangers passed through and asked whose land it was, she'd answer first, voice strong and clear. It's ours. We made it so. And they had, together, every inch, every breath, every quiet, steadfast day.